The crystal glass shattered on the marble floor, a sound drowned out by the sycophantic laughter of their so-called friends. Ilara lay on the ground, a sharp pain in her side, the warm blush of humiliation creeping up her neck. Just moments ago, she was the gracious hostess, the 6-month pregnant wife of the man of the hour, Julian Croft. Now, she was just the woman he had kicked to the floor in front of his mistress for daring to interrupt his speech. His cold, dismissive words echoed in the sudden silence. Now you all see what I have to deal with every day. In that single brutal moment, the love she thought she was fighting for died. But something else was born in its place. A cold, calculated resolve. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had just signed over his entire empire. The scent of expensive perfume and triumph hung thick in the air of their sprawling penthouse apartment. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered below, a carpet of diamonds laid out in deference to the man of the hour. My husband, Julian Croft. Tonight was his coronation. The ink was barely dry on a 9-figure tech merger that had elevated him from a citywide success story to a national headline. I was Ilara, his 6-month pregnant wife, the silent partner in his ascent. My role tonight, as it had been for years, was to be the perfect accessory. Smiling, serene, and just visible enough to reflect his glory. My baby bump was a testament to his virility. My quiet grace a backdrop for his booming charisma. I moved through the throngs of investors, rivals, and socialites, my hand resting protectively on my belly, ensuring every glass was full and every hollow compliment was met with a genuine-looking smile. Julian was holding court near the grand piano, a glass of amber liquid in one hand, the other draped possessively around the slim waist of Chloe. Chloe, his protégée from the marketing department. Her dress was a sliver of crimson silk, her laughter a little too loud, her eyes fixed on my husband with an adoration that was anything but professional. They were an open secret, one I was expected to tolerate with dignity. The key was realizing their entire infrastructure was obsolete, Julian boasted, his voice carrying across the room. They were dinosaurs waiting for the meteor. I just made sure I was the meteor. A wave of appreciative chuckles followed. He was about to launch into another self-congratulatory anecdote when a server, a young man with nervous eyes, bumped into an elderly investor, sloshing champagne onto the man's sleeve. I saw the flash of panic on the server's face and Julian's tightening jaw. To defuse the situation, I stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the investor's arm. "Oh, Mr. Abernathy, I am so sorry," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Let's get that taken care of immediately. Julian, darling, perhaps you could continue your story while I help—" I never finished the sentence. Julian's face, which had been beaming with pride moments before, twisted into a mask of pure fury. "I was speaking," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Before I could process his anger, his leg shot out. It wasn't a hard kick, not enough to send me flying, but it was deliberate, calculated. The side of his polished Italian loafer connected with my calf, knocking me off balance. My high heels, already a challenge on the slick marble, betrayed me. I stumbled, my arms pinwheeling for a moment before I collapsed onto the floor in a heap of beige chiffon. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The music seemed to stutter and die. For a heartbeat, there was only a stunned, horrified silence. I looked up from the floor, my cheek pressed against the cold stone, my mind reeling. The physical pain was a dull throb, completely overshadowed by the searing, public shame. Julian looked down at me, not with remorse, but with contempt. A cruel smirk played on his lips. He turned to his audience, his mistress still tucked under his arm, and laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "Now you all see what I have to deal with every day," he announced, as if my clumsiness was a burden he heroically bore. A few of his cronies, the ones who relied on his favor, forced out sycophantic chuckles. Chloe shifted, a flicker of something. Pity? Discomfort? Crossing her face before it was smoothed away. Mr. Abernathy looked horrified, his stained sleeve forgotten, but I saw none of them. My world had narrowed to the man standing over me. The man I had loved. The man whose child I was carrying. In his eyes I saw no love, no concern, not even pity. I saw only irritation and ego. He had stripped me of my dignity as casually as he might take off a coat. Something inside me, a fragile, hopeful thing I had been nursing for years, finally shattered. The pieces didn't dissolve into dust. They reformed, hardening into something sharp and unyielding. As my vision swam with unshed tears, my mind became icily clear. You didn't just hurt me, I thought, the words a silent vow etched onto my soul. You just signed your own sentence. The physical ache in my side was a dull, constant reminder of the previous night. But it was nothing compared to the hollow cavern that had opened in my chest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of our guest room, listening to the pre-dawn silence of a home that no longer felt like mine. Julian hadn't even checked on me. He had slept in our master suite, a king in his castle, oblivious or uncaring. My mind drifted back, sifting through the years, searching for the man I had married. I found him in the flickering memories of a cramped walk-up apartment that always smelled of coffee and ambition. I met Julian when he was just a brilliant coder with a revolutionary idea and holes in his shoes. He had the vision, the fire, the unstoppable drive. What he didn't have was capital. I did. My parents had left me a substantial inheritance, a nest egg I had planned to invest cautiously. But Julian's passion was infectious. I saw the future in his eyes, and I fell in love with it. And with him. Against the advice of my family's financial advisor, I poured every last dollar into his fledgling startup. Croft Innovations was built on my money and his genius. In those early days, we were a team. We spent sleepless nights fueled by cheap pizza, sketching out business plans on napkins. He called me his angel investor, his good luck charm. When we needed to secure our first major line of credit to build the company, the banks were hesitant to bet on his non-existent financial history. But I had pristine credit and was the primary capital investor. We'll put everything in your name for now, Alara, he had said, kissing my hands. The company, the holding accounts, all of it. It's the only way they'll approve the loans. It's our company, but your name will be our shield. When we're stable, we'll sort it all out. I trusted him implicitly. The love was real, intoxicating. We married in a simple city hall ceremony, promising to be partners in everything. The money came faster than we ever imagined. With success, the man I loved began to fade, replaced by a polished, arrogant stranger. Julian Croft, the CEO, was charming, ruthless, and deeply insecure. He started referring to my initial investment as some seed money from my wife, as if it were a quaint footnote in his epic tale. He slowly, methodically, pushed me out of every major decision, relegating me to the role of supportive spouse. He hired Chloe, and dozens like her, surrounding himself with people who told him he was a god. His favorite tool was gaslighting. When I questioned his late nights, he'd accuse me of being paranoid. When I pointed out a flaw in a business strategy, he'd condescendingly tell me to stick to party planning. He made me feel small, irrational, and completely dependent on him, even as we lived in a penthouse bought and secured under my name. He had convinced me so thoroughly of my own inadequacy that I had forgotten the fundamental truth of our empire. It wasn't his, it was mine. The memory of that legal structure, a detail buried under years of emotional manipulation, surfaced like a life raft in the sea of my despair. The company was registered in my name. The deeds to the penthouse, the vacation home in the Hamptons, the portfolio of stocks. All of it was legally, unequivocally, mine. He had built the engine, but I owned the entire machine. He had forgotten. In his hubris, he had forgotten the foundation upon which his throne was built. The sun began to cast a weak gray light through the guest room window. The house was still. I slipped out of bed, my body protesting with a dull ache, and crept to the master bedroom. Peeking inside, I saw him sleeping peacefully, sprawled across the California king bed like a conquering hero. The sight filled me not with sadness, but with a cold, clarifying rage. I went to his office. It was a monument to his ego. Dark mahogany, leather-bound books he'd never read, and a massive desk that faced the door, a seat of power. I ignored it all and went to the antique safe hidden behind a painting. He thought I didn't know the combination, but I'd watched him open it 100 times. My fingers, trembling slightly, turned the dial. 2208 to 14, our wedding anniversary. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. The heavy door swung open. Inside, beneath files of his recent triumphs, was an older, worn leather folio. My folio. I pulled it out, my heart pounding. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Croft Innovations, listing me as the majority shareholder and sole director with executive authority. The deeds to all our properties, all bearing only my signature. The trust agreements, the investment accounts, everything. It was all there, a paper trail of my power, forgotten by him and, until now, by me. I sank to the floor, the documents spread around me like armor. The tears that I had refused to shed last night finally came, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of fury, of grief for the woman I had allowed myself to become, and of a dawning, terrifying empowerment. He had made me believe I was nothing without him. He had kicked me, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, for years. He had tried to break me. Now, he would see what a broken woman could do. I sat there on the cold floor of his office until the sun was fully up, a plan forming in my mind. It was audacious, ruthless, and final. This wouldn't be a messy divorce with tearful negotiations. This would be a corporate takeover. A coup. My internal monologue was no longer a whisper of pain, but a declaration of war. I'm not just leaving you, Julian. I'm going to make you disappear from the empire I built. I will take back my name, my money, my life. And I will do it so quietly, so efficiently, that by the time you hear the thunder, the lightning will have already struck. My first call was not to a divorce lawyer. It was to Marcus Thorne, the sharpest corporate litigator in the city. The second was to a 24-hour locksmith and a private security firm. The silent war had begun. The next 48 hours were a blur of surgical, silent maneuvers. While Julian was at the office, basking in the glow of his victory and likely entertaining Chloe, I was systematically dismantling his world. My first meeting was with Marcus Thorne, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary. I laid the documents on his polished boardroom table. He examined them, his expression shifting from professional interest to unconcealed shock, and finally to a predatory grin. "Mrs. Croft," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't a divorce case. This is a corporate decapitation. He has absolutely no legal standing. You own everything." By noon, acting on my authority as the sole director, we had drafted the necessary orders. The first strike was financial. I had Marcus's team issue directives to every bank and financial institution we worked with. All corporate accounts were frozen, pending an audit for financial irregularities. Julian's 9-figure personal line of credit, which was guaranteed by the company I owned, was instantly suspended. His corporate black card would be declined. The second strike was physical. A locksmith arrived at the Penthouse and changed every lock, including the private elevator access. I programmed a new security code, one he would never guess. By 3 p.m., a team of new security guards, stoic, broad-shouldered men, loyal only to me, had replaced the building's regular staff. They had one simple instruction. Julian Croft was not to be permitted entry. The third and final strike for the day was internal. I drafted a memo, which Marcus's office vetted for legal precision. It was sent to the entire board of directors and all senior staff at Croft Innovations. 2. Board of Directors and Senior Management. From Ilara Croft, Director and Majority Shareholder. Subject: Immediate suspension of Julian Croft. Effective immediately, Julian Croft has been suspended from his duties as CEO and all operational roles within Croft Innovations, pending a full investigation into allegations of gross financial misconduct and fraudulent use of company assets. All staff are to report to the Interim Leadership Committee, details of which will follow. I hit send. The fallout was instantaneous. My phone lit up with calls from panicked board members. I answered each one calmly, assuring them it was a necessary measure to protect the company's integrity. The main event happened at 6:32 p.m. The head of my new security detail buzzed me from the lobby. "Ma'am, Mr. Croft is here. He's displeased." I watched on the security monitor. Julian was stabbing at the elevator keypad, his face turning from confusion to rage as access was repeatedly denied. He was yelling into his phone, likely at his assistant, who would have no answers. Finally, he stormed towards the front desk, his voice a low growl on the intercom. "What the hell is going on? Why are my keys not working?" "There's been a change in security protocols, sir," the guard said, his voice flat. "I'm afraid I can't allow you upstairs." Julian's laughter was incredulous. "Do you have any idea who I am? I own this building!" That was my cue. I took the elevator down, dressed not in a revenge dress, but in simple tailored trousers and a silk blouse. I felt calm, centered, powerful. I walked out into the lobby, stopping a safe 10 feet from him. His face was a thundercloud. "Ilara, what is this? Some kind of pathetic joke? Tell these gorillas to let me into my home." "It's not your home, Julian," I said, my voice even, devoid of the emotion he expected. "As of this afternoon, it is only my home." He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Then his phone buzzed. It was likely the first of many calls about his frozen accounts. His face went pale. "What did you do?" "I protected my assets," I replied. His rage finally boiled over. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "My wife has locked me out of my house. She's hysterical, possibly a danger to herself. I need officers here immediately." He thought he could use the system against me, paint me as the emotional, unstable woman. He had underestimated me for the last time. When 2 police officers arrived, Julian immediately launched into a performance, playing the concerned, victimized husband. "Thank you for coming, officers. My wife, she's pregnant and has been under a lot of stress. She's locked me out and I'm worried about her." I simply waited. When they turned to me, I handed them a file I had prepared. It contained the deed to the property, in my name only, and a copy of the restraining order Marcus had filed that afternoon, citing the incident at the party as domestic violence. The senior officer read the documents, his expression hardening. He looked from the paper to Julian, then back to the paper. He handed the file back to me. "Sir," the officer said to Julian, his tone now firm and official. "This is a civil matter, but based on this order, you are required to leave the premises. You are not to contact Miss Croft." Julian's jaw dropped. He looked from the cop to me, the realization finally dawning on him. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a coup. "This is insane," he sputtered. "This is my company, my money." I gave him one last look, a quiet statement of fact. "You thought you were untouchable, Julian. You built the brand, but I signed the checks. I was always the one who made the life or death decisions. You just never bothered to read the fine print." I turned, walked to the elevator, and went back up to my penthouse, leaving him standing there, humiliated and powerless on the curb in front of the building that was no longer his. The war was far from over, but the first battle was a decisive victory. I had expected Julian's next move to be a legal barrage. I expected his high-powered attorneys to flood my lawyer's office with motions and threats. Instead, my new doorman buzzed me 2 days later with an announcement that was, in its own way, far more intimidating. "Ma'am, a Miss Chloe Vance is here to see you." My blood ran cold. Chloe. The mistress. The woman in the crimson dress who had watched me fall. What did she want? To gloat? To plead Julian's case? I told the doorman to send her up, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I would face this too. She stepped out of the elevator looking smaller and far less glamorous than she had at the party. Dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, with her hair pulled back and her face scrubbed clean of makeup, she looked young and uncertain. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. "Ilara," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I know you have every reason to slam the door in my face, but I had to talk to you." I crossed my arms, my face an impassive mask. "Why?" "Because he's trying to ruin me too," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "After he was locked out, he called me. He was furious. He said this was all my fault, that I distracted him. He fired me. He told me he was suing me to get back the investment he made in my career. The condo he co-signed for, the bank is foreclosing. He drained the joint account he set up for me. I have nothing." The story was sickeningly familiar. A different verse, same song. He built her up only to have total control, and the moment she was inconvenient, he tore her down. "He promised me everything," Chloe continued, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He said you and he were basically separated, that the marriage was just for appearances until after the baby was born. He said he was going to leave you, and we were going to build a life together. I didn't offer her comfort. I just listened. The woman I had hated, the symbol of my husband's betrayal, was just another one of his victims. He hadn't loved her. He had used her. He had seen ambition in her, the same way he had once seen it in me, and he had exploited it. A strange, unexpected idea began to form in my mind. Julian thought we were his two greatest weaknesses. What if we became his greatest threat? "Chloe," I said, my tone shifting from cold to clinical, "crying isn't going to help you, but evidence will." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion. "He was careless with you," I explained, my mind racing. "He bragged, he made promises in writing, he moved money around to impress you. I need everything. Every text message, every email, every late-night confession. Did he ever talk about his business dealings? About moving money to offshore accounts to avoid taxes? About creative accounting?" A flicker of recognition sparked in her eyes. He was always bragging about how smart he was, how he was running circles around the IRS. He called his offshore accounts his rainy day fund. He even recorded some of his calls for posterity, he said. He was obsessed with his own legend. It was more than I could have hoped for. "We can destroy him, Chloe," I said, the "we" feeling strange and powerful on my tongue. "Not just personally, but professionally. We can expose him for the fraud he is. You help me, and I will make sure you are made whole. More than whole, I'll give you the resources to start your own company, free of him." It was a gamble, trusting the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. But looking at her, I didn't see a rival. I saw a reflection. I saw another woman who had been blinded by a charismatic man's promises. An unwilling alliance was formed in that moment, forged in the fires of a shared betrayal. Over the next week, we worked relentlessly. Chloe handed over a treasure trove of evidence. There were texts where Julian explicitly detailed his intent to divorce me after securing my assets through the pregnancy. There were emails outlining schemes to move company profits into personal offshore accounts. And then there was the gold mine, a voice recording from his phone. Chloe had it from a night he'd gotten drunk and philosophical, recording a memo to my future self. In it, he laid out his entire philosophy with chilling clarity. The key to power, his voice slurred on the recording, is to find what a woman wants: security, love, a career, and make her believe you're the only one who can give it to her. You invest just enough to make them dependent, and then they'll give you everything. They'll sign the papers, they'll look the other way. They become the perfect silent shields for your ambition. It works every time. Listening to it, I felt a wave of nausea. But Chloe just looked at me, her expression hard. "Let's burn him to the ground," she said. We leaked the recording, anonymously, to a prominent financial journalist. The story exploded. Croft tapes started trending on social media. The narrative Julian had been carefully crafting of the victimized husband wronged by an unstable wife was shattered in an instant. He was no longer a brilliant tycoon. He was a manipulative predator. The public tide had turned, and it was about to become a tsunami. The day of our first major court hearing felt like the world was holding its breath. The case had become a media circus. Julian, desperate to salvage his reputation, had hired a notoriously aggressive legal team and launched a PR offensive. He did a tearful, live-streamed interview from a borrowed hotel suite, portraying himself as a heartbroken man whose mentally fragile pregnant wife had been manipulated by corporate rivals into destroying their family. He claimed my actions were endangering the company and our unborn child. He was demanding an emergency injunction to reinstate him as CEO and grant him 50% of all assets, arguing that his sweat equity had built the empire, regardless of whose name was on the paperwork. I walked into the courthouse flanked by Marcus Thorne and my security detail. I chose my armor carefully, an impeccably tailored power suit in winter white. I felt a sense of calm resolve. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to end a war he had started. The courtroom was packed. Julian sat at the opposing table, looking thinner, his expensive suit hanging slightly off his frame. He shot me a look of pure hatred. He tried to catch my eye, to project some of the old power he once held over me, but I refused to look at him. I focused only on the judge. Julian's lawyer, a shark named Peterson, began with a dramatic, emotional appeal. He painted a picture of Julian as the visionary genius, the loving husband pushed to the brink by a wife suffering from prenatal hysteria. He called my freezing of the assets a reckless, emotional act. "Mr. Croft built $1 billion company from nothing," Peterson thundered, "and his wife, in a fit of pique, seeks to steal it all, based on a single, regrettable argument. He is asking for what is fair, 50%, the share he earned." When it was Marcus's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He was calm, precise, and devastating. "Your Honor," he began, "Mr. Peterson's narrative is compelling fiction. Let's discuss the facts." He systematically dismantled their case. He presented the incorporation documents, the deeds, the bank statements. He showed, indisputably, that I was the sole legal owner of 100% of the assets in question. As for Mr. Croft's sweat equity, Marcus continued, he was handsomely compensated for his role as CEO, a role from which he was suspended not out of pique, but due to credible evidence of significant financial fraud. He motioned to a thick file, evidence which we have already submitted to the district attorney's office. A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Julian went white. "But the defense argues that this is fundamentally a marital dispute," Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly as he walked towards the judge's bench. "They claim Mr. Croft is entitled to half of the marital estate, and normally, that would be a matter for lengthy debate. However," he paused for dramatic effect, "in this case, it is not, because the parties signed a prenuptial agreement." Peterson shot to his feet. "Objection! There was no prenup!" "On the contrary," Marcus said smoothly. "There was. Mr. Croft seems to have forgotten it, just as he seems to have forgotten who owned his company." He produced a document, handing a copy to the judge and to Julian's stunned lawyer. It was the simple partnership agreement we had signed all those years ago, the one that outlined my initial investment and our respective roles. I had insisted on it. A final piece of advice from my late father I had actually followed. Buried in the legal jargon of Section 7B was a simple, powerful clause. Marcus read it aloud. In the event of a marital dissolution resulting from an act of documented physical violence or infidelity by either party, the aggrieved party shall retain 100% of all assets, both personal and corporate, listed under their name. The other party forfeits any and all claims. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a checkmate I had forgotten I even possessed. The clause was my father's final gift, a shield against the very man he had never fully trusted. Julian stared at the document, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He remembered. I could see the memory flickering in his eyes, signing the paper dismissively in our old apartment, eager to get his hands on my money, never reading the fine print. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had seen everything, read the clause, looked at the police report from the night of the party, and then looked at Julian. Her expression was one of utter disdain. Her ruling was swift and brutal. The injunction is denied. The terms of the signed agreement are ironclad. The assets, the company, the real estate, all of it belongs to the plaintiff, Ms. Croft. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell like a guillotine. It was over. Julian didn't move. He just sat there, a statue in a $1,000 suit, his face completely blank as the empire he thought was his evaporated before his eyes. I stood up, smoothed down the jacket of my white suit, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. I didn't feel triumphant or joyful. I just felt free. The weight of him, of his manipulations and his ego was finally lifted. I walked out into the sunlight, head held high, ready to start my life, and the life of my child, anew. The weeks after the court ruling were quiet. The media storm died down, replaced by business journals analyzing the Croft coup with a mixture of awe and admonition. I spent my days not in boardrooms, but in a nursery, picking out soft, neutral colors and assembling a crib with my own 2 hands. For the first time in years, my home was silent, peaceful. It was mine. I had made good on my promise to Chloe. With a generous severance and a line of credit from a holding company I established, she was already scouting locations for her own marketing firm. Our alliance, born of mutual pain, had concluded with mutual respect. We weren't friends, but we were survivors. The victory, however, felt incomplete. One evening, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived by courier. It had no return address, but I recognized the spidery, aggressive handwriting. Julian's mother. I opened it with a sense of dread. The letter was short and venomous. "You may have won this battle, you conniving little snake, but the war for my son's legacy is not over. You will never know a day of peace." I tossed the letter into the fireplace, watching the edges curl and blacken. It was an empty threat from a woman who had enabled her son's monstrosity. I wouldn't let it touch me. But just as the last of the letter turned to ash, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "He didn't just deceive you and the marketing girl. There are others. You need to know the whole truth about what he did in the company's name." My blood ran cold. The message hinted at secrets darker than infidelity and financial fraud. A third woman? A larger conspiracy? The idea of another fight, another scandal, was exhausting. I put the phone down, deciding not to reply. The past was the past. My future was about my child. 2 months later, my son, Oliver, was born. He was small and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and my eyes. Holding him in my arms in the quiet of the hospital room, the entire saga with Julian felt like a distant, painful dream. All that mattered was this new life. A week after I brought Oliver home, I received an email from a new address with a simple subject line. "Oliver." It was from Julian. Ilara, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. What I did was unforgivable. I have lost everything I thought I valued. And I realize now I lost it all long before you walked into that courtroom. I lost it when I lost myself. I am in therapy. I am trying to understand the man I became. But he is my son. I'm not asking for a second chance with you. I am begging for a first chance to be a father to him. I will abide by any rules, any supervision. I will do anything. I don't want my son to only know me as a monster on the internet. Please. Reading the words, I felt not hatred, but a profound weariness and a flicker of something else. Pity. This was not the arrogant CEO. This was a broken man. Oliver deserved a father, but he also deserved to be protected. I agreed to meet Julian in a neutral location, a quiet cafe, with my lawyer present. He looked diminished. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness in his eyes. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future. We talked about co-parenting. He agreed to supervised visitation, to paying child support from the small consulting job he had managed to get, to attending parenting classes. I just want him to know, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion, that his father loves him, and that his father is deeply sorry for hurting his mother. It was the first real apology he had ever given me. The road ahead would not be easy. Forgiveness was a distant country I wasn't sure I ever wanted to visit. But as I watched him look at a picture of Oliver on my phone, a look of pure, unadulterated love on his face, I realized my revenge was complete. I hadn't just taken his empire, I had forced him to confront the man in the mirror. My victory wasn't in his destruction, but in my own rebirth, and in the quiet, hopeful possibility that even after the most devastating betrayal, there could be a second chance. Not for a failed marriage, but for a father to earn his son's love, and for a mother to finally find peace. The war was over. Building a new world was just beginning. This story is a testament to the quiet strength that lies within us all, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Ilara's journey from humiliation to empowerment reminds us that our greatest power is not in enduring pain, but in deciding we deserve better. What were your thoughts on her alliance with Chloe? Could you ever forgive someone like Julian, even for the sake of a child?
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.